Look at her. Just a nurse with bandages, not a warrior. They sneered across the base, laughter echoing as Sarah Donovan walked by. She never shouted back, never lowered her eyes. Instead, she carried their words like stones in her pocket, waiting for the moment to prove them wrong. That moment came when a Marine lay bleeding at the foot of 200 stone steps under fire. They mocked her as too weak, too small, but Sarah did the impossible. Step by step, with bullets cracking past and voices daring her to stop, she carried him higher than anyone believed she could. At the bunker door, she collapsed, yet changed everything. And the next morning, 500 Marines stood in silence, saluting her name. The dust of the forward operating base clung to everything. Boots, rifles, even the tin trays in the mess hall. For Sarah Donovan, it clung heavier than most, settling like an extra layer of weight she didn't need. At 27, she had spent 3 years as a combat medic, yet to the Marines she served beside, she was still just the nurse. Her med bag was her badge, but to them it was a symbol of weakness. It started small, a joke here, a smirk there. Corporal Briggs was usually the loudest voice in the mess hall, his tone carrying over the clatter of utensils and shouted conversations. He would nudge his buddies, making sure Sarah could hear. "Hope you brought enough Band-Aids, Doc. Don't strain yourself carrying that kit. It might weigh more than you." The others would laugh, quick and sharp, the kind of laughter that was less about humor and more about dominance. Private Nolan, fresh from boot camp, had a nervous energy that made him eager to fit in. He latched on to Briggs's mockery like it was a lifeline. Whenever Sarah walked past, Nolan would find a way to echo the sentiment. "Careful, Donovan. Don't trip over your stethoscope." His voice cracked, betraying immaturity, but the laughter he earned was enough to embolden him. Then there was Sergeant Riker. He didn't laugh. His contempt was quieter, colder. He believed medics were necessary, but only as background players. To him, Sarah's presence at the front was an accident of policy. He had once said in front of an entire squad, "Medics patch holes. Warriors make sure the holes don't happen. Don't confuse the two." Sarah had not responded, though his words stayed with her longer than any shouted insult. The truth was, Sarah didn't fight back. Not with words. She walked on, her eyes steady, her expression calm. She had learned early that shouting only fed the fire. Instead, she carried their words like invisible stones in her pocket, small, sharp, heavy. Each insult settled deeper, waiting for the day she would throw them back, not with noise, but with proof. Every morning, before the heat thickened into something unbearable, she checked supplies in the aid station. Gauze, morphine, saline. She handled each with precision. Her hands were quick, sure and steady, the same way they had been when she helped her younger brother recover from a broken leg years earlier. But here, surrounded by men who measured worth in pull-ups and firing drills, none of that mattered. When she crossed the yard, her med bag bouncing against her hip, she could feel the eyes. Marines lounging near the mess hall would spit into the dirt and smirk. "You ever think about getting a real job out here?" one would call. Another would add, "Combat medic," fancy term for someone scared of the front line. The words weren't new, but repetition gave them weight. Still, Sarah's stride never faltered. She never lowered her gaze. She never dropped her shoulders. Her silence was not surrender, it was defiance. But defiance was invisible. To them, she was still small, still unworthy. Sometimes late at night when the base was quiet, Sarah would sit by her cot and trace the faded stitching on her med bag. In the corner was a patch embroidered with two words her father had said often: "Never quit." The letters were worn, frayed by dust and time, but they held her together. She knew that sooner or later, the moment would come when silence would no longer be enough. Until then, she endured. Briggs kept sneering in the mess hall. Nolan kept parroting his jokes. Riker kept making his cold distinctions between warriors and medics. The cycle never broke, but beneath their mockery, something was shifting, though none of them could see it. Sarah was building a reservoir of quiet strength, one that didn't need their recognition to exist. And when the day came, when the world caught fire and lives hung in the balance, it wouldn't be Briggs's swagger, Nolan's echo, or Riker's contempt that saved them. It would be the medic they mocked, the one who refused to break, The one they underestimated, the one they never truly saw. That day was closer than any of them imagined. The air was heavy that afternoon, the kind of dry heat that cracked lips and stung the eyes. Marines shuffled across the yard, some heading toward the motor pool, others lingering near the mess hall. Sarah Donovan was restocking bandages inside the aid station, her hands moving with quiet efficiency. She was halfway through counting morphine injectors when the first sound shattered the routine. Gunfire. Sharp staccato cracks echoed through the valley, bouncing off the stone walls that surrounded the base. A moment later came the dull thud of an explosion. The ground trembled. Dust cascaded from the rafters. "Ambush!" someone shouted outside, the word cutting through chaos like a blade. Sarah froze for only a second before her body took over. Her medbag was already on her shoulder, her boots pounding across the floor toward the door. Outside, the base had transformed into a storm of noise. Shouts, gunfire, the metallic clatter of rifles snapping into place. Marines scrambled for cover behind sandbags and vehicles. And then she saw him. At the base of the long stone staircase carved into the hillside, 200 steps that led to the bunker, Lance Corporal Mason lay sprawled on the ground. Blood poured from a chest wound, staining the dirt beneath him. He was a big man, easily over 200 pounds, his rifle still clutched loosely in one hand. Sarah sprinted toward him, ducking low as bullets whipped past. She dropped to her knees beside Mason, her fingers already tearing open his uniform. The wound was bad, deep, ugly, bleeding fast. She pressed a bandage hard against it, her hands slick with crimson almost instantly. Behind her, a voice barked, "Donovan, back to the aid station." Her Lieutenant Mercer stood a few yards away, clipboard in one hand even now, his face pinched with anger. He was a wiry man, obsessed with regulations and protocols. "You're out of your depth," he shouted over the roar of gunfire. "Get him stabilized and wait for evac." Sarah didn't look up. Her focus was on Mason's ragged breaths, the way his chest hitched under her pressure. "If we wait, he's dead," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "I gave you an order," Mercer barked. Bullets cracked against the wall behind him, showering sparks. But Sarah wasn't listening anymore. She looped Mason's arm over her shoulder, her small frame bending under his weight. For a moment, it seemed impossible. Her knees buckled, her back screamed. Yet she gritted her teeth and stood. The staircase loomed ahead, steep and merciless. From cover, Marines shouted in disbelief. "No one can drag him up those stairs," one yelled. "She'll get herself killed," another muttered. Even Mercer's voice broke with frustration. "Donovan, stand down." But she took the first step, then another. Each slab of stone was like a mountain. Mason groaned, his blood soaking into her uniform. Her breath came in gasps, but her grip never loosened. Bullets cracked past, dirt spraying at her feet. The voices behind her, mocking, disbelieving, desperate, blurred into noise. At step 10, her legs already trembled. At step 20, her arms burned. Still she climbed. Halfway up, Mason stirred. His lips moved, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "Leave me. Can't." Sarah's jaw clenched. "Shut up," she hissed through clenched teeth. "You're not dying today." By step 70, sweat dripped into her eyes, mixing with dirt and blood. Her vision blurred. The weight across her shoulders pressed like iron. Her boots slipped against the stone, scraping raw skin from her palms as she caught herself. Still, she climbed. From below, the Marines kept watching. Corporal Briggs shook his head, sneering. "Told you she's too weak. She won't make it." Private Nolan laughed nervously, trying to echo. "She'll drop him before 100 easy." Only Sergeant Riker stayed silent, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. At step 100, Sarah nearly collapsed. She dropped to one knee, Mason's dead weight dragging her sideways. A bullet cracked against the stone inches from her head. For a moment, the world tilted, threatening to throw her down the staircase. Gasps rose from the soldiers below. They expected her to fall, but she didn't. With a guttural cry, Sarah forced herself up, her lips split against her teeth, blood running down her chin. She adjusted Mason's weight, her shoulders screaming in agony. Then she climbed again, step after step, 120, 150, each one a battle of its own. Mercer's voice grew quieter, swallowed by disbelief. Even Briggs's taunts faltered. The mocking turned to uneasy silence as Sarah kept going. At step 180, Mason stirred again. His hand gripped weakly at her arm. His eyes fluttered open, glassy with pain. Why? Why are you doing this? Sarah's breath tore from her lungs, but her answer was steady. Because I'm a medic, and medics don't quit. Step 190. Her body was beyond exhaustion. Every muscle screamed for release. Her vision tunneled, dark at the edges. But the bunker door was close, so close. Step 200. With the last of her strength, Sarah staggered forward. Hands reached from the bunker, grabbing Mason, pulling him inside. She collapsed at the threshold, her face pressed against the dusty stone. Her body refused to move, but her hands still clutched Mason's jacket as if letting go would undo everything. The battlefield fell into stunned silence. Marines who had doubted, mocked, or dismissed her now stood frozen. Even Mercer said nothing, his clipboard limp in his hand. Sarah Donovan had carried a man where no one believed she could. She had defied the bullets, the laughter, and the orders. And though she lay broken at the bunker door, she had changed everything. The first step was agony. Sarah Donovan's boots scraped against the ancient stone, uneven and worn smooth by years of marching feet. The weight of Lance Corporal Mason, bleeding and barely conscious, bore down on her shoulders like a mountain. Each breath came ragged, tearing through her chest. Yet she tightened her grip and climbed. The staircase stretched above her like a cruel riddle. 200 jagged slabs carved into the hillside, leading to the safety of the bunker. Bullets whined past, striking sparks from the stone. Dust filled the air, choking her lungs. Behind her, Marines shouted, but none moved to help. Their voices carried doubt, disbelief, mockery. At first, Sarah tuned them out, but soon another sound cut sharper than gunfire. Laughter. On the ground near the sandbags, Specialist O'Connor, a technician with wire-rimmed glasses and a smirk that never left his face, hunched over a tablet. The drone he piloted buzzed above Sarah, its camera lens glinting in the sunlight. "Check this out," O'Connor said, turning the feed toward a group of soldiers who had taken cover. On the screen, Sarah appeared small, staggering beneath Mason's bulk, her uniform soaked in blood and sweat. "She's putting on a show, huh? Shame it's gonna flop before she hits 100. The Marines crowded around, their laughter mingling with the crackle of gunfire. Some shook their heads in pity. Others smirked in cruel satisfaction. "Look at her legs already shaking," Briggs muttered, eyes fixed on the screen. "Told you, too weak." Nolan leaned closer, grinning nervously. "I'll give her 20 more steps before she drops him." Even Riker, silent as ever, didn't stop them. He only watched, his expression unreadable, his arms folded tight. Sarah didn't know about the drone, didn't see the faces pressed to the feed, waiting for her to fail. But she felt the weight of their doubt all the same. It clung to her like chains, every step heavier than the last. At step 20, her thighs burned. At step 30, sweat stung her eyes. Mason stirred faintly, groaning against her back. She tightened her grip, whispering through clenched teeth, "Hold on, we're not done." But her body screamed for relief. The strap of her medbag dug into her shoulder, the edges biting through fabric into skin. Blood dripped from her scraped palms as she steadied herself against the wall. For a moment, she wanted to stop, to let Mason down gently, call for someone stronger. The thought flickered like a cruel temptation. Just a moment of rest, just one excuse to quit, and then the memory came. She was 16 again, in a sun-bleached desert outside Tucson. Her younger brother Ben lay on the ground, his leg twisted from a bad fall off a dirt bike. He was crying, scared more than hurt. Sarah's hands had trembled as she set the bone, but she did it anyway, wrapping the splint with strips of torn shirt. Her father stood nearby, his voice calm, steady, cutting through her panic. "Don't quit, Sarah. Not ever." Those words stitched themselves into her bones, as permanent as any scar. They came back now, clear as the crack of gunfire, louder than O'Connor's laughter, stronger than Briggs's jeers. She gritted her teeth, pushed Mason higher, and climbed. Step 40, step 50. Her legs trembled, but they held. The soldiers below still mocked, their voices carried upward. "She's nuts," one barked. "She'll kill them both." Sarah didn't answer. Her silence was sharper than any retort. Step 60, step 70. Mason's blood soaked deeper into her uniform, hot against her spine. His head lolled, lips whispering something she could barely catch. "Leave me. Can't make it." Her voice snapped like a whip. "Shut up, Mason. You're not dying today." At step 80, her knees buckled. She slammed against the stone wall, gasping, nearly crushed beneath his weight. For a moment, everything blurred. Dust, noise, pain. She could almost hear O'Connor's smug chuckle miles away. But she pushed up again, spitting blood from a split lip. She forced one foot higher, then the other. Step 90, step 100, halfway. From below, the laughter grew uneasy. Even through the drone feed, her determination was undeniable. Sweat poured, her body shook, yet she hadn't stopped. O'Connor tried to keep the mockery alive. "She's done now. No way she sees 150. His voice lacked conviction. Briggs stayed quiet, jaw tight. Nolan swallowed hard, the grin gone. Sarah kept climbing. Step 120. Her vision tunneled, black creeping at the edges. She saw her father again, standing tall under the Arizona sun, his voice echoing, "Not ever." Step 150. Her body was broken, but her will was not. Each step was a battlefield of its own. Each gasp was a war cry no one else could hear. By step 180, silence had fallen below. No more laughter, no more jeers. Only the drone buzzed overhead, capturing the impossible. Step 190. She stumbled, nearly fell, but forced herself upright, dragging Mason with her. Step 200. At last, the bunker door loomed. Hands reached out, pulling Mason inside. Sarah collapsed at the threshold, her body giving out completely. Yet her grip on his jacket remained, knuckles white even in unconsciousness. The Marines below stared at the drone feed in stunned silence. The medic they mocked had just climbed where none believed she could. Sarah Donovan had done the impossible. The world tilted sideways as Sarah Donovan reached the top of the 200th step. Her body trembled with violent exhaustion, every muscle screaming for release. When the bunker door finally swung open, she staggered through with Lance Corporal Mason still clutched to her back. The moment she crossed the threshold, her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the rough concrete floor, Mason sliding into the waiting arms of two Marines who rushed forward. Her chest heaved, her face pale, her hands still clutching the torn fabric of Mason's jacket, as if letting go might undo everything. "Medic down!" someone shouted. Other corpsmen swarmed around them. Mason was carried deeper inside, blood dripping from the trail he left. Sarah's body lay limp, sweat soaking through her uniform, her lips cracked from dehydration. For a terrifying second, it seemed she might not wake again. Inside the makeshift triage bay, the medics worked quickly. They cut Mason's shirt open, exposing the ugly wound in his chest. Beneath the soaked bandages Sarah had applied, the bleeding was controlled. Imperfect, but enough to buy time. One of the older medics, Harris, pressed a hand to the dressing and let out a low whistle. "She did this under fire?" Harris muttered. "Damn thing's holding better than half the kits I've seen." Another medic shook his head. "He's alive because of her. Inches from the heart, but she sealed it tight." Mason groaned, his breathing shallow but steady. Against all odds, he would live. Sarah, however, remained unconscious on a stretcher nearby. An IV bag hung beside her, dripping fluid into her arm. Her small frame looked almost fragile beneath the harsh bunker lights. Marines filed in and out, some stealing glances, others whispering. The whispers turned to arguments. Near the entrance, Captain Hayes stood rigid, his voice carrying like it always did. "This was reckless," he declared, addressing the officers clustered around him. "Dragging a 200-pound man up 200 steps under fire? That isn't heroism. That's gambling with two lives." His words hung heavy in the air. A few nodded in agreement, their faces grim. Hayes was respected, known for his strict discipline and cold logic. To him, rules were survival. Deviation was death. But others weren't so sure. "She saved him," one Marine muttered. "No one else even tried." "She could have gotten them both killed," Hayes snapped back. His eyes cut toward Sarah's motionless form. What if she had collapsed at step 50? What if Mason had bled out because she wasted strength on theatrics? Discipline keeps this unit alive. not stunts. Lieutenant Mercer, who had shouted at Sarah earlier to stand down, nodded quickly, seizing the chance to protect his own authority. Exactly, sir. She ignored a direct order. That sets a dangerous precedent. But then Harris, the older medic, spoke up. His voice was low, rough with years in the field. With all due respect, Captain, if she hadn't done what she did, Mason would be in a body bag right now. Rules don't mean a damn thing to a man who stops breathing before evac arrives. The room went silent. Hayes's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. Outside, night fell over the base. Gunfire faded into uneasy quiet. The ambush had been repelled, but its scars remained, bullet holes in the walls, bloodstains in the dirt, and whispers that refused to die. In the barracks, Marines spoke in hushed voices. She carried him the whole way? 200 steps, under fire. No way, not her, not Donovan. The story spread like wildfire, growing with each retelling. Some described her as unstoppable, a ghost climbing through smoke. Others insisted she had been foolish, risking everything for one man. By midnight, the base was divided. Half the Marines spoke of Sarah with awe, the other half with disdain. The doubters clung to Hayes's words, reckless, insubordinate, unsustainable. The believers spoke of courage, grit, and the kind of strength no regulation could measure. Even those who had mocked her the loudest, Briggs, Nolan, O'Connor, remained quiet. They didn't join the praise, but they no longer laughed either. Briggs sat on his bunk, staring at the floor. Nolan chewed his lip raw. O'Connor pretended to sleep, but his drone feed had already made its way through the unit, evidence that silenced many of their jeers. Meanwhile, Sarah drifted in uneasy sleep. In her dreams, she climbed those steps again and again, each one heavier, each one longer. Her father's voice echoed, "Don't quit, Sarah. Not ever." When dawn approached, the whispers hadn't stopped. They clung to the humid air like smoke, filling every corner of the base. Some called her a savior, others called her a liability, but all agreed on one thing. Nothing would be the same after what Sarah Donovan had done. The first light of dawn stretched across the desert valley, painting the base in pale gold. Dust hung low in the morning air, stirred by the boots of restless Marines as they gathered in the yard. The usual clamor of voices, jokes, and shouted orders was gone. Instead, there was silence, thick, heavy, charged with anticipation. At the center of the formation stood Colonel Aldridge, a tall man with gray streaks in his hair, and a voice that carried like thunder even when he spoke low. His reputation was one of steel and discipline, a commander who never wasted words. When he called an assembly, the entire base listened. 500 Marines, shoulder to shoulder, lined the yard in perfect formation. Their uniforms were crisp despite the dust, their faces unreadable masks of discipline. The rising sun glinted off the brass of their insignia, off the polished barrels of their rifles. It was a sea of order, waiting for one moment. And then the bunker door opened. Sarah Donovan stepped out, her body still aching from the climb, her legs trembling with every step. She carried her med bag, though the strap dug painfully into her bruised shoulder. Her uniform was clean, but the stains of blood hadn't been fully scrubbed out. The dark blotches clung like solemn proof of what she had endured. She expected whispers, perhaps more mockery. Instead, she was met with silence. Absolute, complete, suffocating silence. Colonel Aldridge stepped forward. His boots struck the ground with deliberate weight. He stopped a few paces from her, his gaze steady, unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his voice rang out across the yard. "Lieutenant Donovan." Her spine straightened instinctively, though her breath caught in her throat. No one had called her by rank in days, not since the ridicule had reduced her to nurse, doc, or worse. Aldridge's eyes swept the formation, then returned to her. His voice was calm, but it carried power. "Yesterday, while under fire, this medic carried one of our own, bleeding, unconscious, near death, up 200 stone steps. She did it alone, against doubt, against laughter, against orders. She saved his life. She proved every one of us wrong." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "And for that, she has earned something more than medals or commendations. She has earned respect." Aldridge turned sharply toward the formation. His voice rose, booming like a command that could shake the earth itself. "Company, attention!" 500 boots snapped together, the sound echoing across the yard like a single thunderclap. "Present. Arms!" In perfect unison, 500 hands rose to foreheads, 500 rifles tilted upward, 500 salutes locked into place. The silence deepened, heavy and reverent, broken only by the sound of leather gloves brushing against helmets. Sarah froze. The sight before her blurred as tears filled her eyes. For the first time since stepping onto this base, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't just a nurse. She was seen. She was honored. Her hands trembled at her sides, but she didn't lift them to wipe her face. She stood small, battered but unyielding, staring at the wall of salutes that stretched before her like a wave. In the second row stood Corporal Briggs, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the ground. His usual smirk was gone, replaced with a clenched silence. Beside him, Private Nolan shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. He tried to hold his salute steady, but his hand quivered just slightly. Further back, Sergeant Riker kept his posture rigid, but his eyes flicked briefly towards Sarah before darting away. The contempt that once lived in his gaze had been replaced by something he couldn't name. Something close to shame. Not one of them spoke. Not one of them dared. The salute said everything their words never could. Colonel Aldridge lowered his hand first, his command voice cutting through the stillness. "Order! Arms!" The formation obeyed, rifles snapping back to their sides. Yet the silence remained. A Marine broke rank. Private Jensen, a quiet young soldier who had seen Sarah begin her climb the day before. He stepped forward, holding something in his hand. Her med bag. The strap had torn during the ascent, and inside the bag a small photo had slipped out. A faded picture of her younger brother, smiling in a hospital bed. Jensen had tucked it back carefully. "You dropped this," he said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard. Sarah took the bag, her fingers brushing over the stitch patch in the corner. "Never quit." She nodded once, her throat too tight to speak. Jensen saluted her again before returning to his place. The silence stretched a moment longer, then Aldridge spoke once more. His voice was softer now, though still edged with command. "You saved a Marine, Donovan. You saved one of us." Sarah swallowed hard, her lips pressing into a thin line. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The Marines slowly began to disperse, but the weight of the moment lingered. Every soldier who passed her gave a small nod, a glance, a subtle acknowledgement. No words, just respect. Briggs walked by last. He didn't meet her eyes, neither did Nolan. Riker paused only for a heartbeat, his lips parting as if to say something, but no sound came. Then he moved on, shoulders stiff. Sarah stood alone in the yard as the sun climbed higher, her med bag slung once more over her shoulder. The salute still echoed in her chest, louder than any insult, stronger than any order. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. For the first time, she carried no stones in her pocket. She had carried them all, every doubt, every jeer, every ounce of scorn, up those 200 steps. And now the burden was gone. The salute ended, but its echo lingered in every corner of the base. What had once been filled with laughter at Sarah Donovan's expense now carried a heavy, unspoken respect. No one dared call her just a nurse again. In the days that followed, the consequences of that climb began to unfold. Corporal Briggs, once the loudest voice of mockery, was reassigned to a rear posting. Officially, the transfer order cited administrative necessity. But everyone knew the truth. His constant sneering had no place in a unit that had just witnessed Sarah's defiance. Briggs left quietly, his trademark grin gone. The mess hall felt strangely empty without his voice, but no one missed it. Sergeant Riker, whose disdain had been sharper than any insult, stayed on base. Yet something had shifted. His authority no longer carried the same weight. Men who once nodded at his words now looked away, unconvinced. In drills, his orders were followed, but not respected. Riker's silence became heavier than his old contempt, a reminder of a man who had underestimated one of his own and lost more than pride in the process. Private Nolan, the over-eager recruit who had clung to Briggs's shadow, fared differently. His shame was quieter, but deeper. He avoided Sarah entirely. slipping out of rooms she entered, refusing to meet her gaze. When others whispered about the climb, Nolan stayed silent, his face red. He didn't joke anymore. He didn't laugh. For a boy who had once sought validation in cruelty, the weight of his mistake was punishment enough. Through it all, Sarah returned to her duties without ceremony. She restocked supplies, checked vitals, and walked the yard with her med bag slung over her shoulder. She didn't seek the spotlight. She didn't revel in the shift of power. Her silence remained, but it was different now. Not defiance, but quiet strength. She no longer carried the stones of others' doubt. And then there was Private Jensen. Jensen had been young, quiet, almost invisible in the chaos of the base, but he had seen everything. Sarah's first step up the staircase, the way she staggered, the way she never quit. That night in the barracks, he sat hunched over a small notebook. His pen scratched steadily, his words tumbling out as if they couldn't wait. "Dear Mom, you wouldn't believe what I saw here. Yesterday they said she couldn't do it. They laughed at her, called her too weak, too small. But I watched her carry a full-grown Marine up 200 stone steps while bullets flew. She never stopped. She never even looked back. I thought I knew what strength looked like, but I was wrong. Her name is Sarah Donovan, and I'll never forget what she did." Jensen folded the letter carefully, tucking it into an envelope. Weeks later, it would find its way home, then into the hands of a local reporter. From there, the story spread further, through newspapers, through word of mouth, through the invisible web of soldiers' families. Sarah's climb became more than a moment. It became a legend. In the barracks, Marines told it in whispers at night. At training camps, recruits heard it as a cautionary tale and as inspiration. Across bases, medics carried the story with pride, proof that they were more than patchers of wounds, proof that courage wore many faces. Sarah never claimed the title of hero. She never asked for it. But sometimes legends aren't chosen. They are carried step by step, stone by stone, until they live on long after the climb is done. Stories like Sarah Donovan's remind us that strength isn't always about muscle or rank. It's about refusing to give up when the world expects you to fall. In America today, that lesson stretches far beyond the battlefield. Maybe it's a single mom working 2 jobs, a grandfather caring for his family, or a young student fighting for a better future. The faces change, but the principle is the same. Courage often shows up quietly, in the moments no one is watching, when quitting would be the easier choice. And yet Sarah's story also asks us harder questions. Was she reckless, risking her own life against orders? Or was she the purest definition of what it means to serve, putting another's life above her own? That debate is worth having, and I'd love to hear what you think. What lessons from this story speak most to you? Do you see echoes of Sarah's climb in your own struggles or in the lives of those around you? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. Thank you for walking with us through this journey. If you found meaning in this story, please like, subscribe, and join us for more untold stories of quiet heroism.